It was one of the darkest chapters in recent internet history. A popular live streamer, already broken both physically and mentally, was humiliated in front of thousands of viewers. The stunt was meant to drive views, to get people talking. But no one could have predicted the horrifying outcome that followed. On today's episode of The Infographic Show, we're looking at the murky world of live streaming and the death that shocked the internet. These days, it's not about what you do, it's about who you are. We live in a world of celebrity influencers, and those who get enough of a following can command millions of dollars just by putting out a video. Mr. Beast, arguably the most famous influencer in the world, has turned over-the-top stunts into a full-blown media empire. What started as YouTube challenges has grown into reality shows, burger chains, and even chocolate bars. And he's not alone. His friend Ryan Trahan recently raised more than $11 million for charity by racing through all 50 states in just 50 days, while letting his audience decide how to make the journey harder. But for those lower on the influencer totem pole, it takes a lot to get noticed. Most influencers don't have the resources to do massive road trips, but they don't need to in order to get a following. Some of the most popular figures on YouTube, Twitch, and other platforms are live streamers, people who play video games for a living. But it's an oversaturated market, so standing out is everything. The biggest streamers aren't just gamers anymore, they are media personalities, cultural icons, and sometimes even political voices, with the games themselves coming second. And some streamers will go to extreme measures to get a following. They've decided that for fame, dignity is out the window. Streamers often let fans influence their lives in exchange for donations. Sometimes it's lighthearted, like viewers paying to see a streamer forced into ridiculous costumes, but others push the limits of human endurance, streaming for days on end in order to keep their momentum going. And the fans don't always have their best interests at heart. One of the most disturbing trends in streaming has been trash streams, extended broadcasts that involve the creator debasing themselves live in an attempt to keep viewership up. As viewers donate, creators may abuse themselves, allow others to abuse them, or in more disturbing cases, inflict abuse on a willing participant. While some of these stunts remain relatively harmless, like chugging down foul concoctions, others have escalated into outright violence. These are generally associated with what's known as the lower internet, the underground websites that have little to no content regulation. These are highly popular in Russia, where some of the worst crimes by streamers have been committed. But the trend was mostly underground, until now. Could things really go so far that someone would die? No one thought it was possible, until Raphael Gravon came along. The Frenchman, better known as Jean Pormanov, began his streaming career much later than most. In March 2020, at the age of 41, he launched an account on the then-rising platform TikTok, just as the COVID-19 pandemic was taking hold. His larger-than-life personality and energetic streams quickly earned him a devoted fan base, but there was a dark side to his fame. He would soon move to the platform Twitch, where he gained 669,000 followers and over 35 million views. But as his fame grew, so did the cracks in his persona. His darker side began to surface, with sudden outbursts of rage erupting during gaming streams. He became known for his extreme live challenges, where he would deprive himself of sleep and play for days at a time. These streams catapulted him to a new level of fame, and with it came the growing temptation to push himself into ever more extreme stunts. While his fans enjoyed the content, they were also starting to get worried. Pormanov soon hooked up with other trash streamers who would take part in his streams. If Pormanov was a masochist, these guys were sadists, and they were more than willing to deal out the punishments. It was around this time that Pormanov left Twitch, the world's biggest game streaming platform, for the lesser-known Kick. The site offered streamers better payouts and looser rules, giving extreme content creators far more freedom to push the limits. But the human body can only be pushed so far. As Pormanov's time on Kick began, people started to notice something different, something disturbing. His extended streams were taking their toll on the man. He was starting to age unusually fast. He was already much older than the average streamer, and he looked it, especially as he lost weight. His behavior grew increasingly erratic. Once a familiar face at a major event like Paris Games Week, he now devoted himself almost entirely to his extreme trash streams, and people wondered if it was time for the authorities to get involved. But was it already too late? In December 2024, an investigation by French magazine Mediapart exposed details of what was labeled as an abuse business. Professional streamers would team up with vulnerable people who agreed to be abused in exchange for money. This usually involved homeless people who would agree to be hit or humiliated for a quick cash bonus. A modern-day version of the twisted bum fights game from the early 2000s. But Pormanov was unique in that he was the abused figure. A month later, the Nice prosecutor's department began its own investigation into two streamers who had appeared on Pormanov's streams, Owen Naruto Sanazandori and Safin Hamadi. The two men were also known for their extreme content, and they were more than willing to help Pormanov debase himself to boost his streams. The investigation scrutinized much of their content, not just Pormanov's streams, but no charges were filed at first as authorities continued to dig deeper. But by then, Pormanov was already too far down the path of self-destruction. As he became more and more desperate for views, he started pushing the limits of human endurance. Many of his streams saw him locked away for days without sleep, forced to play games while being relentlessly abused, and deprived of basic needs. His so-called assistants, fellow streamers, were often the ones carrying out the abuse. It left many viewers with the disturbing impression that Pormanov was less a star and more a prisoner, and eventually he would be pushed too far. While Pormanov typically played games during his streams, they had become secondary to the extreme violent and humiliating content he was now known for. In early August, he began an indefinite livestream on Kick. The stream dragged on for more than 12 days, with Pormanov's content growing increasingly disturbing and abusive as time passed. Yet, for most viewers, it was just business as usual from the eccentric Frenchman. Until it very much wasn't. The master of ceremonies for this extreme broadcast was Naruto, Owen Sanazandori, who was known for abusing Pormanov before. And as the days went on, Pormanov started to look less like a streamer and more like a torture victim. A week into the stream, he became increasingly exhausted, haggard, and desperate for sleep and water. People in the comments went from cheering to questioning whether this was safe. But Naruto didn't stop. He doubled down. Most of the stream showed Pormanov sitting before the camera as he was attacked and humiliated. Sanazandori, joined by frequent collaborator Safin, knew exactly how to exploit his greatest weakness, his cigarette addiction. The withdrawal put his body under immense strain, and they used that to push him further, tempting him with the promises of a cigarette that they didn't always deliver. It seemed like they were looking just to see how much he could endure. The first extreme element of the challenge was sleep deprivation. Go without rest for too long, and it can be deadly. The longest verified case belongs to Robert McDonald, who managed to stay awake for more than 18 days back in 1986. He survived without lasting damage, but the Guinness Book of World Records has since stopped recognizing the record, citing the severe dangers of anyone attempting to break it. Pormanov didn't go entirely without sleep during those first 12 days. He would sometimes curl up on the floor and try to rest, but each time he did, his tormentors made sure to jolt him awake abruptly and cruelly, and each wake-up call would bring new horrors. While Pormanov was ostensibly a willing participant at the start of the stream, that quickly changed. When he attempted to leave, he was threatened and intimidated. He asked to call the emergency services for medical help, but was denied access to a phone and mocked for his cowardice. The overseers of the challenge seemed to take joy in targeting him with every possible psychological weak point: his age, his appearance, his lack of dignity, and the possibility that he was gay. And where the psychological abuse left off, the physical abuse started. One of the most common assaults on Pormanov during this violent stream was repeated slaps in the face, particularly by Safin and a third streamer known as 3 Cheveux. His hair was yanked back without warning, and any attempt to sleep was met with punishment, beatings while he lay on the floor, sudden blasts of water, or woken up with deafening noises. As the stream went on, the abuse escalated. They began ambushing him from behind to startle him, while inventing increasingly cruel methods of torment, strapping an electric dog collar around his neck and shocking him, suffocating him with a plastic bag, even detonating a homemade cigarette bomb that exploded in his face. But there was one other element to the torture that was the most disturbing. There was another participant in the stream, a man named Kudu. This disabled man, who was under guardianship, had seemingly fallen into the hands of the sadistic streamers. They forced Pormanov to turn his abuse onto someone even more vulnerable, ordering him to strike the man before directing Kudu to hit Pormanov back in return. It was a deeply disturbing spectacle, and it only worsened when Pormanov was ordered to brush the disabled man's teeth with a toothbrush soaked in urine. This was just one of the many humiliations they devised for him, alongside scrubbing filthy toilets, being forced to crawl and act like a dog, and being paraded in degrading costumes. At various points in the stream, Pormanov was paraded outside of the compound, sometimes in a wig and women's clothing, other times dressed as a baby in a diaper, a bib, and a pacifier. He would be marched through the streets for public ridicule, often wearing obscene, degrading signs as strangers jeered. At other times, he was beaten, mocked, doused in paint and oil, and even shot with a paintball gun. And through it all, the torment continued unchecked. He was a famous content creator, after all. Surely he must have agreed to it. Meanwhile, the views and donations kept climbing higher, but slowly people started to realize something was very wrong. Pormanov started experiencing breathing difficulties near the end of the stream and appeared more and more haggard. Donations continued to pour in, fueling the abuse, but an increasing number of viewers began voicing concern, warning that this wasn't funny anymore and that Pormanov might actually be in serious danger. Eventually, one of the donors pointed out that Pormanov hadn't moved in a while. Sanazandori, the ringmaster of this sadistic spectacle, went to check in on his once willing captive in his usual fashion. By hurling a water bottle at him to jolt him awake, Pormanov didn't move, and the captors realized something was very wrong. The stream was shut down immediately, and a few hours later, Naruto appeared on his own streams and social media networks to confirm that Pormanov had died. In one last twisted coda, the streamer paid tribute to the man he claimed was a friend, expressing sorrow at his death. But around the world, people reacted with shock. They realized that they had been willingly participating in a man's abuse and degradation for almost 2 weeks, and now he was dead. And then the calls for justice began. At first, Pormanov's extreme content and fragile health had led many to assume his death was a tragic accident. But in the aftermath, several key pieces of evidence began to surface, painting a far darker and more deliberate picture. The first was a message that Pormanov had sent to his mother a short time before his death. In it, he referred to Naruto's setup as a death game and that he felt like he had been kidnapped. More disturbingly, he claimed that he was locked inside and denied permission to leave, and the other streamers knew what they were doing. There was so much content on the stream during those 12 days that not all of it caught people's attention at first. But as the horrors that led to Pormanov's death became clearer, a clip of Sanazandori's commentary started getting attention. In it, he said, "Let him say on camera right now that if he dies tomorrow in the middle of a live show, it's due to his state of health and not to us." Pormanov resisted but was bullied into going through with it live on the air, warning that the audience would turn on them if he died. It was the first clear sign that they knew his health was already in serious danger. And the people started asking, was this a stunt gone wrong, or was it murder? It wouldn't be long before a backlash started. French Youth Minister Sarah El Haïry condemned the platforms for enabling and profiting from violent content, warning that their negligence could drive young people to imitate these deadly stunts. Pormanov's funeral costs were ultimately covered by an unlikely duo, streamer Aiden Ross, famous for his high-profile collaborations, and the controversial Canadian rapper Drake. In the aftermath, an outpouring of support emerged for the ill-fated streamer, and soon the hammer would come down on his tormentors. Kick took an enormous amount of heat in the initial aftermath of the tragedy. Suddenly, a platform that let streamers do whatever they wanted live didn't seem like such a good idea. Under the pressure, they announced that they had banned all the streamers that took part in the extreme livestream and would be cooperating with legal investigations. But others said that this didn't go far enough, calling for a complete reform in how the company did business, and everyone waited with bated breath for the indictments to come down. 4 days after Pormanov's death, the results of the autopsy were made public, and shockingly, authorities found no evidence of trauma or foul play leading to his death. While there were certainly signs of abuse, including plenty of surface-level wounds, none of them were direct causes of death. As such, there were no grounds to charge any of the fellow streamers with murder. While the cause of death was not made fully public, the autopsy indicated that they believe the likely cause of death was pre-existing medical conditions or substance abuse. But across the world, countless people knew what they had seen live on air. From the start of his streaming career, Pormanov was never a healthy man, either physically or mentally. His conduct was extreme and he often acted in disturbed ways, with a wildly unpredictable personality that could manifest in obscenities live on stream. Though he was never formally diagnosed with a disorder, many observers noted that Pormanov displayed signs of mental illness. He was likely targeted because his unusual behavior set him apart in the streaming world. That same troubled mind also made him an easy mark for street-smart, amoral streamers who saw him as a tool for content and profit. But was there anything to be learned from this tragedy? The investigation into streamers, which began before Pormanov's marathon stream and eventual death, is continuing, with the days of live streams likely being key evidence. While Pormanov's death may have never been directly pinned on the men who abused him, they still face a raft of potential charges, many tied to the horrific treatment of the mentally disabled man who was forced to take part in the stream. The fiasco has also shone a light on the brutal nature of some of these extreme streams, and around the world, people are calling for action. Sometimes it takes a death for people to realize just how bad a situation is, and that's exactly what happened here. Pormanov's case was an extreme situation, but it opened people's eyes to the fact that the trash streaming phenomenon preys on the vulnerable. Not only are many of the streamers themselves mentally ill, desperate people who are willing to be abused in exchange for user donations, but many of the viewers display unhealthy behaviors as well. After all, what could go wrong with monetized sadism? Russia and Poland have both passed laws regulating trash streams over the last few years, with Russia actually banning the practice about a year before Pormanov's death. But the problem is many of these streams are held on alternative viewing platforms, making it possible to subvert legal bans by being untrackable. Those windows may be closing fast as platforms like Kick, spooked by the death of a streamer, began to realize that creators like this weren't just controversial, but potential liabilities. And nothing pushes a platform into action faster than a threat to its bottom line. But that might just send the darkest streamers even further into the shadows. It's one of the most twisted rumors about the internet, the dark web where anything can be had for a price. There are rumors of murder for hire and red rooms, where people can potentially pay to see a person tortured or killed. These have never been confirmed, although some high-profile financial, drug, and sex crimes have been exposed on the deep web. But it does raise the question, are these trash streams a slippery slope to far worse crimes? And how far is too far to go in the name of entertainment? Scientists have been studying this for some time. Two of the most famous and infamous experiments of all time delved into the willingness of people to hurt each other when given social approval. The first, carried out by Stanley Milgram in the 1960s, tested how far people would go in obeying authority. Participants were instructed to administer electric shocks to another person, unaware the shocks weren't real. Believing they were genuine, many continued to follow orders, even as they were told to raise the voltage to levels they thought could be fatal. While the larger implications of the study have been hotly debated, as well as its ethics, the experiment proved that when prompted, people can be led to do terrible things, and sometimes even when unprompted. Around a decade later, the Stanford prison experiment conducted a similar test on a much larger scale in 1971. Stanford University psychology professor Philip Zimbardo recruited subjects from the nearby community of male students to conduct a simulation of prison life. The 24 students were split down the middle into those playing a role of prisoners and those playing guards, and the results were shocking. Over only a few days, the guards became increasingly brutal and the experiment was called off after only 6 days. The experiment led to major reforms in how scientific studies are performed to protect participants. But no such guardrails exist online. As it becomes increasingly clear that no one will face prosecution for Pormanov's death, many are left grappling with a grim reality. It wasn't just 3 streamers who were responsible. It was tens of thousands, countless fans conditioned to cheer as a disturbed man put himself through hell for their amusement and kept the donations flowing. Only a small fraction ever spoke up as the content grew darker and more extreme. By the time some did, it was too late. No one knows who the next streamer to push things too far will be, or whether anyone will recognize the danger in time instead of simply applauding the spectacle. A single live stream shocked the internet, but there are rumors of something even worse. Watch What Are Red Rooms of the Dark Web? Are They Real? To uncover what happens in the darkest corners online. Or click on this video instead.